This is the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sicoria, session number 24.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sicoria.
Hey everybody, this is Matt Sicoria, and welcome to session 24 of the Behavioral Observations Podcast. I hope that wherever you're listening that you're having a great week so far. In today's episode, I have a chat with a gentleman named Ryan O'Donnell, and we talk about goal setting, self-management, stress management, taking data on yourself, the operant conditioning of fish, and just about everything else in between. So we kind of go all over the map. And we also talk a little bit about an upcoming conference that he has at the end of the month. Specifically, it's on April 24th, and it is the Next Gen Revolution Summit, or Next Generation Revolution Summit. You can check that out at nextgenrevolutionsummit.com. I think that's right, but it'll be in the show notes. So head over to behavioralobservations.com and look at session 24, and you'll be good to go. I'll have all the links to stuff that we talk about in there. So again, we talk a lot about goal setting, not so much from a tactical or a specific point of view, but more so of what are the types of things you should think about when setting goals. So we delve into some stuff about ACT, specifically values and committed action. And we talk about also giving yourself some credit for all the things that you do. So, again, we kind of go all over the place. It's kind of like taking a walk in the woods and, getting lost and eventually finding your way back to the trailhead. So we kind of, I think, did that here. So Ryan also has a pretty cool podcast that will be debuting sometime in May called Why We Do What We Do. And he talks a little bit about that at the end of the show. So all in all, it was a fun conversation, and I look forward to speaking with Ryan again in the future. Before we get to the interview, I do want to thank those of you who have participated in the Type 2 continuing education units available on my website. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, what I'm talking about is that you can get CEs for driving around your car or walking a dog or whatever you want to do or whatever you do end up doing when you're listening to podcasts. So if you want more information about that, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEUs. And you will find all the info that you need. And again, links to stuff we talked about here in this episode can be found at behavioralobservations.com/session 24, or you can just search Ryan in the search bar. I think that's pretty much it. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Ryan O'Donnell. Ryan O'Donnell, thanks for coming on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. This is a topic I've been interested in for some bit of time, mainly because it's a personal challenge of mine is to stay organized and stay on task and things like that. So we're going to talk about goal setting and self-management for the practitioner. We've got a lot of demands on ourselves as BCBAs, and we put a lot of time into making sure things go right outside of our own personal lives, but it's sometimes that's at a cost of keeping things humming along for ourselves. So we're going to talk about things like that. We're going to also talk about this pretty cool conference you got coming up, right? It's called it's the Next Generation Revolution Summit.
Yeah, Next Gen Revolution Summit.
All right.
That's it.
Cool. And that's at nextgenrevolution.com.
nextgenrevolutionsummit.com.
All right, we just went over that a minute ago,
That's right.
folks.
Quick Google search and pull it up.
That's right. If you have any doubt, just get on Instagram or Facebook, and it's being marketed. It's in heavy rotation, so you'll see something about it, which is how it came across my radar screen. So anyway, yeah, you'll find it. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But, as always, the first question out of the gate here is, how did you come in contact with behavior analysis? Were you always had an interest in it, or what was your first exposure to it?
Yeah, so I actually signed up for a Psychology 101 class at the University of Nevada, Reno. I was fresh out of a really small town called Tonopah, Nevada, and it was right in between Vegas and Reno. There was about 120 kids, and about half of those were bused in from even smaller towns. So coming up to Reno was a little bit of a culture shock. My first semester, everything was just awry. I was trying to figure out how to handle all of that myself. And that's the only class that really kind of resonated with me after my first semester. All I knew is that I wanted to find something that I was passionate about. I didn't know what that was. It's the only one that kind of clicked.
So were you undeclared at that point when you went in?
I was declared as biology because I was thinking something pre-med, but I was functionally undeclared. Yeah.
I see.
So anyhow, I finished up my first semester, went back, talked to my parents, kind of had a harder conversation around like just grades weren't where I personally expected them, nor did they expect them there. I did all right. I mean, I was going back to school next semester, but it was just really unclear where I wanted to go. But I knew that the Psych 101 class was very interesting. I just wanted to kind of pursue that. So I went back in my second semester. I signed up for the next course in the sequence, like numerically, which was just from 101 to 205. Luckily, it was a Principles of Behavior class going through Maloth's book with a guy named Eric Dubuque, who was in Linda Hayes' lab. And it was the first class where first time really where like I was good at something or good enough or good-ish. And I could also, I was very interested in it. It had always been one or the other. So that kind of like piqued my interest or caught my interest, I guess, and turned me on to it. So from there, I kind of explored all the other realms of psychology. So social psych, educational, kind of like jumped around. I had a whole semester of all those. And then within the end of the first week, I was just like, these are not for me. So kind of like pulled through that semester, wrapped those up, and I hit that professor back up, Eric Dubuque, and just said, hey, what can I do? You said that there's ways to kind of get your hands on. So that pulled me into the world of adults with intellectual disabilities at a place called PATH. And it was a day program, and I started kind of getting my hands into the day-to-day of like what it's like to be a frontline staff in that world. And I met a couple cool people there, Mark Melody and Melissa Nossick. And both of them were very gracious, kind of took me under their wing and showed me how to start really like programming and exploring the depths of some other areas of behavior analysis. So that was kind of like where I got hooked. I started learning how to kind of read about it and like got interested in it. I was talking with more people and decided after a couple of years of seeing people's lives impacted by it that that's where I wanted to kind of like chase down and pursue more. So I signed up for Florida Institute of Technology's master's program in Orlando, Florida. Started going into grad school down there in, 2011 to 2013. There's a lot of not sleeping long nights. I worked in the fish lab with Dr. Josh Pritchard down there. Mm-hmm. A lot of fun stories that kind of came from there. But that's where I kind of started like exploring and trying to figure out like what else could you do with this behavior analysis.
Hey, can I stop you for a sec?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you talk about the fish lab for a second?
Yeah,
perhaps
sure.
A lot of people may not be familiar with that. So
yeah. So I honestly don't know where the state of the fish lab is. So listeners are going to have to like Google and figure that out or hit up Josh. But really, it started in Reno, Nevada, when he was a graduate student in Linda Hayes' lab, and he took it with him down to Florida. And the idea was that students can get hands-on experience shaping. I thought it was kind of weird at first when I first heard of it, but it was actually really cool. So there was a small lab that we'd set up, and you could go in there, you could shape fish to swim through hoops. There's different tools out there on like how you can kind of use them, or I guess like what sort of tools you use to train them with. But primarily there's a wand that you use that'll deliver food. So you stick it in the water, and there's a little plunger at the top that'll drop the bottom of it down to feed the fish little flakes. And there's various different apparatuses, I guess. So there was hoops, there was soccer, basketball, footballs, where you can kind of teach them to hit those sort of things into goals. But what Josh had done is, as we were progressing through there, he started getting more of the some more kind of like advanced stuff in there. So we had a hoop that they could swim through that was infrared, and it could sense. That was really cool because then you could hook it up to a computer and start automating your schedules of reinforcement and whatnot. So that is essentially where I spent a lot of time kind of playing around with really simple schedules of reinforcement, shaping behavior in a medium that I'd never experienced before. So like what I mean is when we're usually working with a human or whatever, an animal, like we're not interacting with water. So one thing that I immediately learned real quick is as soon as you try to deliver an alleged reinforcer, it's very easy to accidentally shape something totally else, totally different up from that. So the water was actually a medium that made you really pay attention to the procedures and the process and like what you were really doing and like making sure that you were very fast in the way that you delivered things.
Oh, okay. So let me just see if I get where you're coming from. So if you drop
Yeah.
a food flake or pellet or whatever in there, and it just happens to take its sweet time kind of going down, the fish could be doing something else, and you could inadvertently reinforce something totally different than what you intended. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So like if you're used to delivering something like a token or whatnot, you throw that on the table, you're good to go. But imagine if you went to put it on the table and by then it's kind of like floating around and the student stands up and like turns and now you just accidentally reinforced, that behavior or that chain instead of the one that you're actually intending to kind of go for,
So you had some very confused fish on your hands for a little bit.
Yeah, we had it was actually a really cool training opportunity to teach other students about those sort of variables as well. So yeah, it was two parts. It was exploring kind of the depths behavior analysis and the philosophy,
No
theoretical, and
depths.
other ways. Yeah,
sorry,
but it was also like hands-on training, and that it was a very different way, right, than if you were doing anything with a pigeon or a rat or whatnot. But it's been so valuable, just that hands-on shaping training. Like,
sure.
I use that stuff all the time.
Yeah, I've had some EAB background with pigeons and dogs, but never nothing aquatic. So, but thanks for that little detour. I want to kind of explore that a little bit more. So, anyway, so you were talking about the fish lab before I got you on this tangent of inadvertent reinforcement of strange behavior.
Yeah. So the fish lab was also, like I said, there was a lot of other students involved, and we explored a lot of other areas. So that's where I started getting into kind of these areas of self-management. We can get into those a little bit later on how. But I also got into like, how do we use these, I guess, things, not only in my own life, but like, how do we kind of push beyond like what I was used to, which was a lot of like sitting in the chair and working with people one-on-one. And I was interested in how to kind of grow out of that. So I had some mentors that kind of helped me work on how to get into more consulting roles, management roles, director roles. And I kind of worked through that during my graduate school time at Florida Tech. And then graduated in 2013. I helped Josh start a private school down there in Orlando, Florida called Lodestone Academy. It's still up and running. I think they just like got their second building going. And now the last 2 years I've spent in Reno, just to kind of get back into, it's kind of related to all this self-management stuff, things that I love are a lot more of the things I love are here in Reno, whether it's the activities and family and those sort of things. So yeah, now I'm located in Reno, Nevada. I work at two different places. There's just a nonprofit called High Sierra Industries that I do some instructional design and kind of OBM work with. And then the Institute of Meaningful Instruction, I co-founded with a couple other gentlemen, and we do things similar to this summit, I guess. And it's kind of our place to play around with different ideas and kind of be little entrepreneurs of sorts.
And what do you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we were working with a partner of mine named Brian Hallauer, and he had worked at the Davidson Academy. It's this very well-known, prestigious academy here located at the University of Nevada, Reno for gifted and talented students. I don't know the exact requirements. Kind of think your Einsteins of the world, 155 plus IQs. And he was two things. He was a musical instructor as well as one of the counselors. And the counselor tools that he had were working, but when you saw what we were doing and kind of helping people really explore areas of like self-management and really kind of pursuing their passions, their values, their dreams, those sort of things, he was just kind of like, whoa, we need to take this into the gifted and talented world. So what we did is just kind of talked with him for 6-9 months about ideas here and there and what maybe the possibilities were. We emailed some people in the field and just said, hey, do you think it would be a good idea for us to do some sort of like online micro course around helping gifted and talented students and their parents kind of line up their values, goals, and daily actions? And they wrote back and said, yeah, make sure you make it online, because there's a lot of people outside of Reno that are probably looking for something like that too. So that's where we started, was a gifted and talented online micro course, exploring self-management. It's still in beta test. We haven't like scaled it up in any sort of way. We got some options on the table to look at those sort of things, but we wanted to make sure that we had a good idea of what we were doing and kind of the, the science and the process behind it before we were really pushing that too much. So that was the first project that we housed at IMI. And now we're looking for kind of collaborations and as those things kind of come up. So this Next Gen Revolution Summit I got a couple other speaking engagements going on. We consulted and worked and partnered with another organization in the area, and they said we should put something like this together. And I said, scope it out. We both agreed it looked like a good idea, and we decided to go for it. So those kind of ideas on, you need a little bit of resources to pull them off, but they sound like a good idea and worth the gamble. That's kind of what's the Institute of Meaningful Instruction is, I guess, for us now.
I see. So
yeah,
sounds like almost think tanky, but with a entrepreneurial bent to it. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you talked about some things that I want to get into a little bit more. So let's dig into some of this self-management stuff. So talk about how you got interested in self-management in general, and if you want to go into some specific strategies that you've found personally helpful, jump right in.
For sure. So I don't remember exactly. There was a few different people talking about acceptance and commitment therapy around me in the lab. And I decided to pick up the book, Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life, and see what it was all about. And it's not like I was looking for a book to kind of solve problems. I was interested in like, what's this ACT stuff about? And I should try to look at the consumer level, but also the scientific level. So I went through that, and there's a few strategies in that I kind of found like interesting. And then I started also reading through the actual 1999 like acceptance and commitment therapy book. And when I started going through those, it was actually the perfect time. It was one of my rules in grad school is to say yes to every opportunity that was around you.
Mm-hmm.
So I filled my days really quickly, and I learned a lot, capitalized on a lot. But at the same time, about a year in, when I found these materials, was also when just the stress and that I was putting completely on myself, and being real far away from family for a year and not being used to those sort of things, like those were starting to weigh down on me pretty heavy. So it was finding that and kind of just realizing that behavior analysis works in those sort of areas that got me interested in it. From there.
Oh, can I ask you? So did you actually do the exercises and get out of your mind into your life?
I went through the whole book and I did all the exercises.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because I have the book. I've read like 75% of it. I haven't done the exercise. I wasn't looking to solve a particular problem either. I just wanted to check it out. So I just, it's more of like a poll than anything, a poll with an N of 1 than anything else is why I asked that question. So
yeah, I went through it right around. I went through it at a perfect time. I have not opened that book. I'm going to open that book back up someday and look at it, but I have not opened it for the last like 5 years. Or whatever.
All right. So I should pause for a second and let everyone know. Okay. So this book has, it's like a kind of it's got some workbook type pages into it that you'd write in as you go through and stuff like that. So it's kind of, before we got too inside baseball here, I want to take a minute to explain that. So anyway, please continue.
Yeah. So I haven't gone back and looked at it. It's going to be one of those things that's going to be really cool to kind of jump back into and reflect on. I went through it. Now, I will say that it was very different for me. I wasn't used to doing those sort of things. If anyone's done any of those practices that are kind of mindfulness and whatnot, like I don't come from that background. I wasn't raised in a background around those values and those customs. So it was very different for me. I didn't fully engage in a lot of them, but I told myself, like, I'll try it out. I'll go through this. I'll read a little bit as I'm reading through the professional materials as well. And that was kind of where I was introduced. Now, from there, there was other materials that I just kind of like looked around for. One of them I remember was Dick Malot's, what is it? I'll Stop Procrastinating When I Get Around to It. That was the first like manual that I found. And that had some different strategies. So the strategies, there's a lot of them that I'm kind of into personally. I think there's a lot of them that are out there. Maybe I'll go into a little bit of what I use initially. We can go into maybe some of what's been out there, and then we can kind of go into like how that transformed. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Okay. So I initially just started recording everything that I thought was important to me. So I used to do that through a lot of standard acceleration charts, actually. I was exploring those and trying to understand how those worked. And I would run anywhere from like 40 to 60 different targets on those. They'd be anything from like your SAFMED cards and your flashcards that you're trying to run for your classes. Or there'd be things like how often I was on my phone or how many steps I was taking, how often I was talking with my family or texting them and things like that. And I was just kind of exploring like what are things that are of value to me, interest to me, and also where do they fall on this chart that people talk about so passionately sometimes. But then some people, don't enjoy as much.
Oh, so yeah, I would say most. Well, anyway, we'll get into that in a bit. But go ahead.
So it's kind of like the blending of those, and really, it was the two of those coming together really showed me how and what that funky blue chart was all about. But it also showed me a lot on like where my behavior more or less lived in these rates and frequencies. So I don't think it matters what your graphical display is, but just simple, this is what is interesting to me, and recording it was my main thing. How you do that was totally different. Sometimes it was through a phone, sometimes, like automated through like the iPhone apps that are already built in for like your steps, for example. Sometimes it was things that I would tally on an actual app, or things like my pages read. I used to keep a sticky note with tallies for numbers for every page of behavior analysis that I read. It was kind of a loose measure, but I was just like, are you consuming the literature? So everything was kind of collected in whatever was easiest, but it was graphed and looked at. That was one of my main strategies. What I started getting into was the values side of acceptance and commitment therapy and relational frame theory. And with that, the idea, I'll go into a little bit, like values are these things you can't hold and have. So I can't say, look, I've got health, right?
Right.
But I can do a lot of things towards it, and I continually can work towards things that we would call healthy. And that was kind of like the missing link for me, because I realized that there's this daily action. I could set some goals and work towards things, but these values were really important for me. So I found some lists online of some folks from like the ACT world. I think one of them was Russ Harris's book, and he has some free materials online where it was just like, here's some values that people often talk about. And I just read through those once a day and just kind of say, what do I really care about?
And I kind of came down. The happiness trap that you're.
I believe it was materials out of the happiness trap.
Okay.
That guy's all over the place. So
yeah,
it might be something else. But that was my second strategy I got onto, was just a quick daily check-in of like, read through these and try to figure out what you cared about. And I don't like use those per se, but there was things like growth, development, learning, family, exercise. Those were the things in health that were like really, I guess, important to me. So what I did is I just started setting goals around that. And that was about 5 years ago. What that has transcended into now is kind of a system to where I wake up in the morning and I do a quick review of what I need to do for the day, but I also like to think about those kind of different bins or areas of values of what do I care about, and just a quick reflection on like, how am I doing on those? So a good example would be family. I'm like, when's the last time I talked to my sister, my brother, my dad, my mother? When's the last time I saw them? Because they're all, remote in a way. So I need to like make sure I'm planning time to go see them. And I just kind of go through those real quickly. And that kind of sets the stage for not only like, what do I need to do for the day, but what are things that I could maybe use my downtime for to kind of plan for the future. And those work really good on a daily level. I don't get through them all the time. You wake up late and those sort of things become barriers to getting those sort of things done. But I also try to do something like weekly or bi-weekly where I really sit down for about half hour to an hour and really pull through those sort of things. And that's just at a deeper level, like how am I doing and kind of plan for the week.
So are you looking through graphs at that in that kind of?
Okay. Yeah. I need to paint that a little better. So again, the tools always shift and change. What I started with was just paper and pencil and, those standard acceleration charts and things all over the place. And now it's a lot more formal. So I have an app that I use. It's called Wrike.com. Weird name, but it's WRIKE.com. And there's a lot of them out there. It's like a Wunderlist and those sort of to-do list apps that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll give you a lot more functionality. So I use that, and it's basically, think of it just like a folder system that you'd have on your computer, but you can write a lot of tasks in, and you can link them together and, kind of create conditional things, set dates. You can measure how long it took you to do various things. So it's more business oriented, and that's where it's used. But I use it for both business and my personal life. So I just sit down at a computer and try to spend about half hour, an hour, and I go through each of those folders, which are just areas that are of interest to me or things that I need to do, and just look at what are my to-do lists and where am I I just reflect on it really, on like, is this something I really want to be doing and working towards? If not, then I plan my day a little bit differently, my week a little bit differently. That's what I do now.
Do you have like a ritual around that? Do you do it like at Sunday night at 8 p.m. or something, or is it kind of like?
You actually got really close. It's usually Sunday nights at 7. I kid you not. Yeah, and I just realized like the data part is kind of missing from that. So I sit down and I do that. Depending on travel and things, I might move it around. I try to never go more than a month without doing that. That's when I just don't feel comfortable, and I don't know kind of what's going on in my own life, I feel like. But the data part, it'll automate some of the data collection for you, depending on like how you want to enter it in there. But as from the beginning, when I started exploring self-management, there was a lot of graphs, and now it's kind of moved into like, if I don't know what's going on, then I will graph and chart it and look at it. But if I can kind of recall throughout the week, like where I spent my time, and also say like I was happy with the time that I spent there, then I don't graph it. So I kind of break the rules of self-management in those ways. But that's actually led to being a lot more aware of where I'm at and where I'm going, I feel like.
I see. I've not been a big to-do list person, much to my own kind of organizational detriment. And I think one of the reasons why I want to do this show is because I think earlier on in my career, prior to kids and other types of family commitments, et cetera, I was able to kind of keep it all in my head, and I was able to get enough done and stuff like that. And now as I'm, getting older and I've got all these different things, and someone's got to go to, karate, and someone else has got to go to drama practice, and, my car is 1,000 miles over for an oil change or whatever. I can see where something like that would be a lot more valuable. And I have been dragged kicking and screaming into the list making world. So, but using that software might seem like a logical next step. So I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ones out there, so I can share some.
Great.
Another one I guess that's cheaper is Wunderlist, and Wunderlist does wonders as well.
Is that WU or is it okay? And
another one out there is Basecamp. Those are the 3 that I've used and played around with. They all have different price points, features. You just find the one that you think works well for you and run with it.
I've definitely heard of Basecamp and Wunderlist before. So yeah, and for those listening, we'll have all these things in the show notes. So if you go to behavioralobservations.com and just search for Ryan, this show will come up, and we'll have links, etc. in there. So anyway, so let's keep going here. So you have this kind of weekly ritual where you kind of sort out your week and things like that on or around the Sunday evening. And if you neglect doing that for a little while, you feel like things kind of lose perspective, I guess. I'm just kind of paraphrasing to make sure I'm on the same page
Yeah.
with you. So what else, what are some other practices that you found helpful?
Yeah. So if anyone's interested, if you're not sure even where to start, like I mentioned, the first place was really that values clarification. Like what is really of interest to me? I think that's a good place to start. I don't know if you want to get into depth on those or if we kind of covered that enough.
In terms of what are your values? I mean, we have talked about ACT we've done a couple of shows on ACT. Okay. So I think those who are listeners to the show, can have been exposed to that material, and so the values piece of identifying big picture things that are important that you always move towards but never achieve. Health is the one that you cited, and that's one that I always use as an example. I always use example of like being a good parent or having close relationships. Those are things that you always work on. And then when you stop working on them, you don't have them, right? Things along those lines. And then I always try to talk about those things, and I'm by no means an ACT expert, but as the interaction between the committed action steps that go along with the values. So if you have stated values of having a healthy relationship with your spouse, the committed action step to that is, making sure that you have planned time to spend together. The health piece would be, the committed action would be, committing to a regimen of exercise and nutrition and so forth. Mm-hmm. So that's the piece. It's hard to describe one without the other. At least that's the way I've found it.
Yeah, and that brings up another area that I kind of embed in that you just made me realize, which is we need to plan those sort of things, but I think we have sometimes get caught up in not focusing on what we are doing already in service of those values. So it's very easy to look at the things that we quote unquote call bad or that we shouldn't have done, or like where we might have wasted time. But that kind of simple shift of this is what I did do throughout the week. That's a big part of my week too. And I have some friends that help me with that a lot as well, because I'm very ambitious, trying to do a lot of things oftentimes. And they're just like, I'll kind of beat myself up. Like I didn't hit all my goals this week. And like, well, you did X, Y, and Z. And that's pretty amazing, mm-hmm. And kind of like provide that encouragement. So that's another strategy I think that's just like kind of embedded into that ACT part of being mindful, but just step back and tell yourself real quick, like, what did I do today? What did I do this week? Like there's a lot more that we get accomplished that we care about than I sometimes think that we realize.
I see. It just so happens that when you're lying in bed trying to go to sleep at night, it's easy to ruminate on the ones that you didn't do or the things that you need to still do.
Yeah.
So that might be a shift of of rumination, So, but
yeah, and those are some strategies I've used with myself for like in practice, just kind of doing short positive praise statements. There's actually some literature in our field in precision teaching looking at those sort of things having an effect. Something as simple as a minute a day on kind of saying, here's what's going on good in my life can make your life better. So.
Wow. I that's pretty cool. So what are some, if we were to kind of put this in the context of a BCBA who's out there running around, so many of us spend so much time in our cars. We've got a lot of commitments. Oftentimes we have responsibilities that are pretty heady, people put a lot of trust in us. They want us to provide these very important services to their loved ones. And sometimes these loved ones have, very significant issues and things like that. And certainly those things can cause a lot of stress. And that's not even touching any of the other stressors in our field, like, all the paperwork that goes along with, say, insurance or, the potential conflict on an IEP team and all those other fun things. So one of the reasons why I want to kind of have you on is talk about, what are some other things from a stress management standpoint or self-management, they kind of maybe go hand in hand, from, putting that in the context of all the responsibilities that, our field of BCBAs, what we have right now. So what are some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So anecdotally, I would say planning ahead, exercise and baseline logic. So we can jump into each of those. So the planning ahead part, we've talked about how I do it. I don't think there's a certain topography that matters, but spending a little bit of time thinking about where you're going makes it a lot easier in the moment to know what to do. So for example, if you have a lot of books that you want to read that are on a shelf, pulling down the one that you're going to read and setting it next to your desk and, marking the chapter that you're going to begin with so that when it is time to read, it's there. Something as little as that can actually help you kind of get going there.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that's personally of interest to me was anything kind of exercise related that I enjoyed is actually huge, because you mentioned stress management. If I don't keep a regular gym schedule, like at least my self-reports of stress definitely increase. And I start to get a lot more antsy, and things like that can kind of get under my, the daily stress is going to get under my skin easier. Now, I don't think it's easy that's always a thing that's very hard to work towards. But it's just a high priority for me. I will drop social interactions on a Friday night if I didn't go to the gym first thing in the morning. And it took a long time to get there, but that's kind of priority wise, where these sort of things lie. Because in the short term, I might miss out on something, but long term, it's a lot more worth it. The last area I mentioned was baseline logic, which, we're doing this stuff day to day in practice. Like I was saying, you can either chart it down and look at it yourself, or you can, watch the interactions as they're kind of going day to day. And if you're keeping track, kind of quote unquote in your mind's eye, in looking at the variables that are going on here, that's what's going to really, really tell you if any of these tools or strategies work. Everyone's in a different situation. You were mentioning, kids going to karate practice or whatnot. I am in a position where I don't have a significant other or children. It's an extremely different world for me than it is for you right now, right?
Sure. Oh yeah.
So I've always added that in there. I don't necessarily, I can't completely take your perspective to suggest things, right? I don't know what it's like, being in your shoes completely. I have a little bit of an idea. But I also don't know necessarily what strategies will work. I can only say, here's some ideas, use your science, to try to figure out which ones work best for you.
Mm-hmm. What are some other things? I know we were, prior to the interview, we were talking about a couple other things in terms of aligning our values with the stuff that we do professionally, as it relates to, self-management and things like that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where to pick up with that.
Okay, let's come back to that. Let's talk. How about we? One of the things we haven't dug into too much yet, because we're talking a lot about self-management, stress management, values, etc. Let's tie that into talking about goals, and we can kind of come back to the values and aligning that with our kind of daily professional work.
Cool. So yeah, just some general kind of tips for goals, I guess, strategies. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned identify what you're currently doing and your values. Those are always your goals need to be tied into those sort of things, what's currently going on in your life and what do you care about. But I like to talk about goal hierarchies. So what am I going to do first, and where am I going to start? But then where do I want to go? So, for example, I'll pull one that's relevant to me right now. I like to do summer outdoor activities. It's about a month or two until those really kick off. And I'm in nowhere near the shape that I need to be in to be able to do some of the things that I want to do. Right. So setting a goal of I'm going to run more necessarily isn't a good one. I would say it is generally what I want to be working towards. But what I'll do is I'll start with what are the activities that I really want to do in a couple months? How long is the distance? What am I kind of getting myself into and signing up for here? And then from there, I can backtrack those out. So if it's a mileage distance, in my example, that I need to be able to hit, I can work those backwards from more or less my goal date. And now I've got a structure of, daily, weekly, or monthly goals that are in a hierarchy that I can actually start knocking out.
So
So it's
if you're
again,
like want to run a marathon or a half marathon, okay, it's either 26 or 13 miles or whatever, and
yeah,
that race is on July something,
yeah,
22nd. So I know by this time I need to do this, that, and the other.
yeah. So having a deadline is really key there. And I've always had to put some time into thinking like how to break them down. So for mine, it's the mileage, the vertical feet, and then the weight that you're going to be carrying, because I'm going to do some like alpine climbing. So all three of those are kind of variables. So from there, I just need to be working on increasing all of those throughout the next X months. And I do keep progress, and I do chart progress on that, because that is one that if I don't watch it really closely, I can slip really carefully,
Mm-hmm.
Another one that we haven't really talked about too much that I think is really relevant is a support network of people that are really interested in not only you achieving your goals, but if you can, also the process of goal setting as well. So when I think of, I don't know, like my mind first kind of goes towards like things like CrossFit and those sort of cultures, right? Like they're very goal oriented, and there's like a strong culture around those sort of things. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a behavior analyst, right, that you're talking to. There's a lot of different people that are working on trying to achieve their goals, but that support network of people who share those same values and want to work towards those same sort of things, it's very nice to have them. And it's not the easiest thing to find. I think with technology, it gets a little bit easier to do those sort of things. There is the social, steps that you need to make as well. But and this is one thing that we encounter actually a lot in that Exploring Tomorrow program that I talked about with parents and their kids, is they'll have the same values, but the performance isn't necessarily like where the expectations are. And I think that'll happen with any dynamic or any group. What the support network should be really functioning as, and like what we teach, is we're here to check in and review progress and talk about change strategies and where things are going. Like, like we all care about each other. It should be a very, as much as possible, like welcoming process to go through. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like I said, like whatever you're interested in, like find one of those support networks. So that's where I've built those into any project that I work on, business related, and as well as like my personal life of like, let's give a couple examples. So throughout a month, I'll have a series of 6 to 8 meetings that occur for various projects throughout the month. And the goal there is to talk about what progress we've made and troubleshoot how to move forward. They're not your traditional, like, here's what I did, evaluate me and walk out. You know what I mean? They're treated more as a support network. But what they do is they help me keep on track of where I'm going and those sort of things. But I can do the same thing in my own personal life with something as simple as, I do this thing in Reno where Wednesdays we go down to the rock climbing gym, and whoever can show up there for an hour and a half in the evening shows up, and we'll have anywhere from 5 to 10 people show up sometimes. And that's your time to check in on who's doing what and talk about your progress and those sort of things. It's a very casual conversation, but it gets those social contingencies in there, and kind of feedback to help you out.
Yeah, I've seen things like the group process help quite a bit in certain aspects, or it just makes it easier or makes it more challenging to blow things off as well. If you've got people who are interested, I won't even say counting on you, but at least interested in seeing you, and vice versa. You see that a lot in one of my hobbies is riding mountain bikes. And, when you have an established group ride that happens every Thursday or Tuesday
Mm-hmm.
night or something like that, there's a lot of camaraderie that goes along with that. In other words, there's all these extra reinforcers that kind of get packed in to that activity. And it makes it harder to skip or bag out on, And
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's huge. And like I said, like, I guess, like, just to add on to that, like, you could, if you skip and you come back, you can kind of experience it in a few different ways. Like sometimes you'll come back and it's like, where you been, and it's like, it's not a pleasant experience necessarily. So I became really aware of, and I try to surround myself with people who understand, I'm going to ebb and flow in these sort of areas. And, when I'm here, like, let's talk about it and let's, check in with me and see how I'm doing on these sort of things, that way the actual social situation doesn't keep you from avoiding the things that you like.
Oh, definitely. So, um, I, I think we could probably keep going on goal setting and self-management and things like that, but I want to make sure we leave time to talk about your upcoming event at the end of the month here. So,
Yeah,
let's dig into that for a minute.
cool. So yeah, it's all kind of related. Like when I mentioned I was at Florida Institute of Technology, I just started diving into really esoteric areas of our own literature. Some people, a lot of people have ran into them. Some people haven't dove into them. They were, your books from like a conference in 1977 that someone recommended on a listserv on this really, weird topic. And you're just like, I've seen that reference a couple of times. I might want to pick that up. And I explored those with my colleague Mark Malady a lot. And it was probably 5 years before he was sooner than I was, but it took about 5 years for me to really say, like, I think I have a decent idea of like what's kind of been done historically in behavior analysis. I don't know all the details, but I have an idea on, where our field's kind of been. From there, there's a lot of the current trends and that idea, or I'll kind of rewind real quick too, that idea of let's save the world with behavior analysis. I think we can all relate to that. We all experience that at some point in our coursework. And I really do think that the world could be saved with the help of behavior analysis and a lot of the things that are in there. Especially a lot of those older books and projects actually talk about a lot of things that are very relevant to a lot of today's problems that just people don't know about. A good example is there's a group called the Quantified Self, and they are kind of rediscovering and a lot of change procedures that we've already identified through behavior analysis. Like big one talks about them as evidence-based kernels, like your minimum units of a process or procedure that if you took anything else out, they wouldn't work anymore. And they're basically kind of heading down the route of rediscovering things that, we already pulled through and identified through a lot of research and literature. And I think it's like going back to it, like behavior analysis can't blame the learner in those senses. We just need to get our stuff more out there. And we need to really spend a lot of time trying to get out there. So I really don't know what it's going to turn into. But what it is after exploring all that literature, talking to like-minded people at conferences for years, we found a group that was willing to, take the more so, risks to try to do a one-day event in person. We're going to be in New Jersey, Edison, New Jersey, but also live stream it and try to do things a little bit differently and like very workshop based. But like the community is not going to stop after that event. So what we're going for is kind of looking at where, kind of going through some of these processes that we talked about, like where are you at, what's your current setting that you're working in. So we have Peter Gerhardt that's going to kind of talk about from the context of intellectual disabilities and working in those sort of settings, like some things that you could actually do to align a lot of your professional goals up with in that context that sometimes people don't realize. So I think to kind of like go into that more, I think a lot of people don't realize that, or I guess sometimes autism and related disabilities is sometimes pitched as like by behavior analysts on like, I want to kind of grow beyond that or, work outside of that. But when we think about it, like there's so many intricacies and things that need to be programmed for and taught there. And there's so much more work that we have to do there. Yeah. It's actually a fascinating population to work with when it comes to professional development, I think. So he's going to kind of highlight, what he's been doing in those areas and some areas of further consideration where we need to kind of keep going.
So just to kind of make sure I'm with you here. So we haven't got it all figured out in those populations, and there's more interesting and meaningful work to be done even within the realm of autism and DD.
Yeah. And you can see that through, do your last podcast, right? The technology and those sort of tools that popped up in, the last 10 or 15 years. And that's just going to continue to blossom. Like behavior analysis is really just starting, I think, to like really take off in a lot of those different ways, especially as we use technology more to kind of get it out there. But that'll kind of like be our warm up to kind of get everybody like, you know, feeling good and realizing where they're at. And then we're going to go through, and my colleague Mark Malady, he's really knowledgeable in all those esoteric references that I was talking about. So he's going to highlight a lot of those projects and some of that research, things like rule governed behavior and schedules of reinforcement, and things that we have an idea of usually, and we're pretty well trained in, but that go much beyond, you know, just the little bit that we sometimes only get covered in core sequences and whatnot. And that'll proceed us into kind of a brainstorming and into what are areas that are really of passion to you outside of the current setting that you're in. And then we're going to spend the afternoon going into really logistics of how can you proceed into those new areas? Like, what are the ethics and both professional and behavioral, you know, approaches to ethics of like how you can go about doing those sort of things? How do you consider things like licensure? That's a huge thing that's going on right now nationally for our field. And it's not, I'll have to clarify, like, it's not that we're going to be teaching things on how to navigate that licensure per se. There's other bodies for that. But working with people and reminding, you know, through the materials and through the workshop, and like, you have to solve these problems, you know, and you have to think about these things as you're pursuing these passions of yours with behavior analysis. In the end of the day, it'll just essentially be a good 2 to 3 hours of creating these things that we've talked about today, action plans and goals, and really working with others in a workshop setting on where can they kind of take these sort of things and start running with them. So
what's the, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Let me back up a second. It's April 24th, right?
Yeah, April 24th, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern.
Edison, New Jersey.
Yeah, and it's also online, so anyone can register, and they don't even have to watch live if they don't want to. We can send the link afterwards as well, too.
Okay, and so you can check that out online or in person. What's the venue in Edison?
It is Pines Manor. I don't know the exact address, but
okay.
It is there in Pines Manor.
And I'm sure all that stuff will be on the website.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let me back up a second. So what is the kind of outcome that, you know, or the transformation, if you will, that, you know, if a practitioner sees this and says, you know what, this looks kind of cool. I'm not really sure what it's all about. I'm a little on the edge here, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, we don't like to promise outcomes, or at least I certainly don't in my practice. Yeah. But you know, what do you expect the outcome or the transformation to be for the participant? Someone who goes in and gives it like a real good go and is, you know, motivated to go through all the workshops and you know, things like that.
I would expect like the large outcome to be you have a clear idea on like where your passion lies and where you want to, like, where you can start going with it like tomorrow. You know, and with that, passion could be anything. I kind of look at it as like passion plus behavior analysis. Like, if you're looking to grow beyond your current setting, then our goal is to give you a framework to start working towards that. Can't promise you that you're going to finish it, like you're saying, that you're going to achieve it. But we're really looking to, it looks like it's shaping up to really start being, I would hope for it to be this kind of platform and community of people that are looking to professionally push their boundaries in kind of their comfort zones and like really commit towards those sort of things. Create that next, you know, OBM project that you've been kind of sitting on, or kind of really look into that idea you've had on how to create that, you know, altered or different service that you've been kind of like scoping out in your business, and you haven't, like, you know, you've been sitting on that idea for too long. Like, let's put some time into actively exploring these sort of things and have an outcome of now you have an idea on like where you really want to go with it.
Okay. And certainly I think all the conversation that's kind of led up to this that we've had about, you know, goal setting and things like that would certainly apply if you're in that situation, right? You know, how do you take action on this idea rather than just have it floating around in your head, you know?
Some of those things we talked about, like writing it down, like there's going to be workbooks for participants to use and materials like that, to where not only are you, you know, having to do those sort of things, but you can also work with people who have done them in different various capacities.
Yeah. I have to say, when I started this I thought about starting this podcast for an embarrassing amount of time before actually taking action on it. So, so if someone's out there and they're sitting on, like you say, sitting on something, or they have this idea that they can't get out of their head of something they want to do, anything that kind of helps jumpstart that process, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And if it sounds a little vague, it's honestly because I don't know your situation, and we have to spend some time, like providing a framework for you to, communicate your perspective and start really sharing it and moving forward on it,
Cool.
That's where it's coming from. But.
So one last thing before I let you go here, because we're coming up on time, and I know you got a busy evening ahead of you. I've learned today on the Facebooks that you are starting a podcast, you and a colleague. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So real quick. Yeah. After Florida Tech kind of wrapped up, I realized that there was going to be no more of a lab model in that kind of community, and it kind of created a little bit of anxiety, and I freaked out for a bit. We started this online group that's now transformed into BX Plus. So it's bxpl.us is the URL to go kind of explore. And it's just been people who kind of didn't have a home for talking to people about behavior analysis. And we meet weekly, and there's goals and projects around that. But one of them was, like you were saying, like you were sitting on the podcast and waiting for a while. We actually recorded a couple episodes at various times and talked about it over the last 3 or 4 years, and nothing's kind of came from it. And we kind of recycled through what our goals were and what we wanted to work on. And myself and Scott Miller were both interested in sitting down and trying to talk about it. There's a couple other members that have expressed interest and are probably going to jump in. But what we're going with is we're right now recording some episodes. We need to build up a bit of a bank so that we have enough to kind of handle some of the ABI travel and whatnot. And it's going to be called Why We Do What We Do. And the goal is to really explore psychological phenomenon and put them in a plain English kind of translation. It'll be from a behavioral perspective, but I guess listeners shouldn't expect, behavioral jargon and those sort of things really being introduced. So
very cool. And I imagine that'll be on iTunes and other familiar podcast outlets.
Yeah, that's the goal. Like many things, we start moving forward, and we got to figure those things out. But that should be pretty quick to handle. So
I see. Do you have? I don't want to again put you on the spot yet, but do you have an anticipated launch date?
We're aiming for before ABI's annual conference in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
But what our rule is we need to have 8 to 10 banked episodes beforehand so that we can handle some other travel stuff coming up. So if we can keep on our schedule, then we'll be on there. If not, it'll be just after ABI.
Right. Or you could just, release them whenever you have them ready, like like someone else. But anyway,
yeah.
having them in the can is very, very helpful for sure. So, it's funny because I hoard some episodes sometimes because I'm afraid that I'm going to go into a dry spell of interviewing people. But anyway, that's a story for a different day. So Why We Do What We Do, coming to the iTunes near you, Next Generation Revolution Summit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's coming up on April 24th. So, this has been a really fun conversation. You sound like you got your hands in a lot of different. Well, that sounds terrible. Actually, you've got a lot of irons in the fire. I was gonna complete that thought, and I just stopped it midway. But anyway, you could tell we're recording this on a Friday evening, or it's Friday evening Eastern Standard Time. So it's been a long week for me, which probably is factoring into some of these rambling questions here. So, but Ryan, it's been really fun having you on here. We'd love to have you back on and hear how this the summit went, and anything else that you've got kind of kicking around. So, thanks again for joining us today.
I appreciate the time.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Hey everybody, I am back by myself. I apologize for getting a little bit punchy there at the end. As I mentioned, it was a long week and we were just kind of goofing around and, like I said, got a little punchy as the blood sugar got low. I'm recording this on the Monday, and so hopefully that means I am a little bit more with it. So thanks again for listening to the show. I thought it was pretty cool, and it kind of inspired me to track some of the things that I've been wondering about. My major professor, Jim Johnson, always used to say something to the effect of, if you're not recording your own behavior, you're not a true behavior analyst. And that's something I've certainly fallen short of. So I've recently started tracking how much I use my cell phone or play on my iPhone or whatever you want to call it, goof around, look at Facebook, Instagram, all those kind of fun time wasters. So I'm using this app called Moment. And if you want to check it out, I put a link to that in the show notes. And I just started using it yesterday, and I'm afraid to look at the data. This is a kind of like baseline, so I don't want to be too affected by it. So I'm going to let it run for a couple days and try not to change my habits too much. Although, as we know, there might be some effects just knowing that it's being recorded, but try not to let that play into things too significantly. So maybe I'll report back on that a little bit later. But in the meantime, if you have a chance to go to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the show, I'd surely appreciate it. It helps get the word out. And another thing, if you want to help get the word out, you can share this on your favorite social media outlet. I, again, genuinely appreciate it. And I think that's pretty much it. And until session 25, I will see you later. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.